Hello, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Douglas Johnson. I am a certified yoga teacher at the advanced 500-hour level. I am an ordained minister. I am a kirtan artist, amongst other things. And today, I wanted to chat a little bit about trusting yourself and questioning yourself. These are both very important aspects, I think, on a spiritual path. Before I get into the talk, however, I do want to thank all of my patrons on Patreon. They are really the ones that make these talks possible. Without their support, I simply do not have the time or resources to create these very humble talks. These are nothing fancy, but unless you've done this kind of work before, you may not realize the amount of time, energy, effort, and investment it takes actually to make a very humble video like this one. So big shout out to them. If you'd like to join that community, please check out the links below. And if you just feel moved to make a one-time contribution, you can do that as well by looking below. I've got PayPal and Venmo if you just want to give me a tip or something like that. All right, let's get into today's talk, trusting yourself and questioning yourself. These are both very, very important, and it can be a subtle distinction, knowing which to really follow. So on the spiritual path, we have, you could say, two voices. It's almost like when I was growing up, at least, there were cartoons where there would be an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other shoulder, and each one would be trying to convince you to do a different thing. And it's really much like that within us. We essentially have two voices, and the way I'll refer to these voices inside of us is the voice for the ego, which is the voice for separation, and I'll call that conventional, the conventional view. This is the view that most people have about the world. So it's not a particularly spiritual perspective. Everyone's separate, everything's separate. What I do that benefits me hurts you, and what benefits you hurts me, that kind of dog-eat-dog perspective. But we have another voice inside of us, and this is our inner teacher. This is really what practices like yoga or reading scripture is trying to put us in touch with. In A Course in Miracles, it's called the Holy Spirit, that voice. I like the term spirit, but some also refer to it as the still small voice. In my mind, all of these are referring to the same thing. We have an inner teacher. In yoga, is sometimes referred to as Ishvara. So Ishvara Pranidhana. So learning to hear this inner voice, if you study the yoga scriptures, or the Yoga Sutras rather, it is pretty clear that if you can practice listening to this voice, Ishvara Pranidhana, then you can skip many steps that otherwise you need to go through. And I believe this is absolutely 100% correct. If you are willing to tune in to that inner voice, then there's so many steps that you can skip, okay? Otherwise, you will likely need to go through these steps in order to purify and clarify and refine your approach and your perspective. So these two voices, the voice for the ego, the voice for separation, and I'll also call this the voice for fear, because that's really the main drive that this voice uses to get you to act. And that's the kind of lens that it puts over your vision. That's the perspective it asks you to take, is one of fear. And again, this is one of separation, you versus me. Oh, I'm not safe. I need to defend myself. I need to attack before I am attacked. Like Byron Katie says, and I really love her as a teacher, but one of the things that she says is defense is the first act of war. I love this because so many people who might proclaim, no, 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 I'm a lover, I'm not a fighter, but I need to defend myself. I need to protect myself. I need to protect my heart. I need to guard my heart. I can't let myself be vulnerable. This is the first act of war, okay? I love that because she's putting it in very stark terms. If you're trying to defend yourself, then you've already declared war. You've already created separation where there doesn't need to be separation, okay? So this is the voice of the ego. It's driven by fear. It uses fear as a motivator to you. It will appeal to your fears. And it will say, no, 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 you can't do that. You need to be smart. You need to defend yourself. You need to, whatever it might be. But it's driven by fear. That's the kind of important point. Now, this is in contrast to what A Course in Miracles calls spirit, what one of my teachers called Shakti. He was advocating that you do your practice so that you can tune in to Shakti and let the Shakti move you. His name is Paul Muller Ortega, and I learned a specific type of meditation with him. And I really like that because, again, it aligns with so much of my study from different traditions, that there is in Taoism the way, right? We're trying to align ourselves with the way. And for me, again, these are all talking about ultimately the same thing. There might be nuances, differences there, but from the perspective I'm talking about today, these are basically the same thing. So this is the other voice, the voice of spirit. In the Course in Miracles, the Holy Spirit. We could say Kundalini, Shakti, okay, even Prana. This is what spiritual practice is hopefully putting us in touch with. Again, Ishvara, the voice of Ishvara. This is what we are trying to tune into and listen to more and more. And here's the hard part. Generally, this voice is advocating for that which does not make sense in this world. Otherwise, it'd be very easy. So, Jesus was speaking from this perspective when he said things like, love your enemies, love your neighbor as yourself, do unto others as you would like to be treated. This is what he was talking about. Logically, egoically, fear-based, these statements make no sense. Why should I love someone who hates me, who's trying to take me down? Somebody who is my enemy? That makes zero sense from a conventional viewpoint. But as I've said many times on this channel before, spirituality is not about a conventional viewpoint. It is about a almost always diametrically opposed viewpoint to the one that is considered the standard view, because the standard view in our culture is the view of the ego, okay? The viewpoint of the news anchor or the podcaster or the journalist, that viewpoint is the viewpoint of the ego, the standard, what I call the standard view, all right? So in spirituality, we're trying to tune in to something that will advise us to take actions that are the opposite of what makes sense from a conventional viewpoint, okay? So this is important to understand for today's discussion. So today I want to talk about trusting yourself versus questioning yourself. And this is really important because many people, and I think this has come through spirituality getting many traditions getting altered in what I'd call the American New Age perspective, by the American New Age. So yoga, a lot of it's been filtered through this American New Age kind of viewpoint. And a lot of important aspects have been de-emphasized or eliminated in that process. And this is problematic because it leads to an imbalanced viewpoint, okay, a problematic viewpoint. You won't get to the destination you're trying to get to with this distorted view. So I think the common viewpoint in New Age spirituality is you just have to trust yourself. If something doesn't feel right, that just means it's not right for you. If you try meditating and you feel uncomfortable, well then stop and do something else. Very, very common sort of New Age perspective. This is in stark contrast to a lot of the traditions and teachers that I've studied with that come out of a more Eastern perspective, where often discipline and being willing to defer to a teacher or someone who has more authority on the subject is usually necessary. There aren't these ancient texts that talk about just trusting yourself. Again, I referred earlier to the Yoga Sutras. There's nowhere in there in the Yoga Sutras where they're like, oh, well, just trust your feeling on the topic. Nothing like that, okay? Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't trust your feelings, but there's a nuance here that we need to draw out. So, on a surface level, the ego speaks first and it speaks loudest. It also speaks from fear. It speaks from trying to run away from or get away from things that make it uncomfortable, okay? So this is important because when you learn something like a deep meditation technique, a technique that takes you deep into meditation where your traumas and your shadow are brought to light, this is a very powerful thing, it's a very important thing, and yet it will not feel good. It won't feel good. I don't care who you are, it's not going to feel good in the moment. The results, long term, will feel great. You'll feel amazing. You'll feel like a new person. But short term, if you're like, oh, well, ugh, I don't like the way this feels. This is making me remember things I don't want to remember. And you stop, you're short-circuiting a very, very valuable process that can liberate you and free you in terms of spirituality. So this is an important thing to understand because the ego will say, yuck, I don't like this. Let's stop. This doesn't feel good. So this is an instance where we may need to override our self. Okay, this is an instance where you might need to question yourself. And I put self in quotations because what self are we talking about? Okay, if we're talking about ego, which is in spirituality referred to as a false sense of self, a false sense of separation, the separate self. In Zen, this would be called the small self. If that's what we're talking about, we absolutely cannot listen to that voice. That voice will lead us astray. That is the voice that we're all listening to, that our society is advocating for. You don't need anything special to listen to that voice, okay? Now I'm talking about spirituality here, so I want to be very, very clear. Maybe that voice will lead you to be a billionaire, huge success, maybe becoming a great family mother or father, okay? I don't know. That's really not my area of expertise, and that's not what I'm here to talk about, okay? Maybe that voice is important for you. Listen to it to achieve career goals, but that's not what spirituality is about, okay? Spirituality is about something else. So if we are listening to that voice, then again, we are moving toward hell instead of heaven. That's a very simple way of thinking of it. If I'm listening to the voice of fear, if I'm listening to the voice of separation, then I'm walking toward hell instead of heaven. And I love the way A Course in Miracles very often makes very stark distinctions. It doesn't allow a lot of sort of gray, fuzzy area, at least where things are important. So it says we're always choosing one or the other. In other words, you're not standing still. You're making choices to see and to decide with one of these voices or the other, moment by moment. So which voice are you listening to? Right? When you decide to call someone or not call someone, when you decide to be vulnerable or not be vulnerable, when you decide whether you're going to try and pursue the career you've always wanted to do versus not, which voice is guiding you, okay? Now again, I'm not saying listening to Spirit is going to make your life easy. I'm not saying that you won't go through bankruptcy listening to the voice of Spirit. I'm not saying you won't get divorced, okay? It's not about surface level outcomes. It's about tuning into something inside of us. Now, in the end, does that make us very peaceful and blissful? Yes, it does. But we might have to watch everything our ego built in our life completely fall apart. That's a very common experience for people on this path. As they tune into Spirit, they begin listening to that. Everything the ego built, which is what, again, our world values. Fame, a sense of community or camaraderie, family, all these types of things that on the surface seem really solid and secure and the things that we all want. These things from perspective of Spirit are very ephemeral. They're here one day and they're gone the next. So I'm not telling you not to pursue those things, but I'm saying they will not lead to the deep sense of peace that I believe everybody deep down is seeking. It's a spiritual urge inside each and every one of us. So listening to ego, again, it's going to take me toward hell. As I said, the ego speaks first and it speaks loudest. So learning to pause, I teach something called a rebound when we do Yin Yoga. And a rebound is like a little pause where I ask you to pause and resist the urge to do whatever it is that the urge is, usually to hug your legs or rock around a little bit. I invite you to resist that urge temporarily for about 30 seconds to a minute and just allow a little space, because this is the space in which we can begin to listen to that still small voice, in which we can begin to tune into Spirit. And so Spirit is our true identity, our true self, our deeper nature, if you will. And this is what we are trying to learn how to listen to, how to tune into, how to be guided by in spiritual practice. And it, for most people, requires practice. It requires us to learn to stop, to pause, to put that narrative that's speaking loud, the ego, to put that aside and to allow some space and allow another voice to speak and to tell us what the truth is, the deeper truth that is probably not apparent to the ego. And this is a very, very important point for us to understand. So, can I trust myself on a spiritual path? Yes and no. If you have learned how to put your fear aside and to trust the voice of Spirit, and I speak I use the word voice, not in a literal sense. Perhaps some people actually hear a voice. I don't, at least not most of the time. I have occasionally, but usually it's not a voice that's speaking. It's usually a feeling, it's a sense. And again, if it's fear, then it's probably not spirit. Okay? If it's like, oh my God, I'm so scared of, this or that, or what if this, what if that, that's just ego. And it could be right, because the ego fears a lot of things that spirit doesn't fear. I'll give you a little secret. Spirit doesn't fear anything. Spirit is in love with all of this. Spirit also doesn't hate anybody. Okay? This is why Jesus said, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Okay? Even people who are trying to kill you or maim you or do evil by you, if we're really tuned in to spirit, I'm not saying this is easy, folks. Okay? I'm not saying I can do it always, but I am sharing with you this very valuable lesson that I've learned. The more that we can do that, the more often, generally, we are going to feel what we truly want to feel in life, which is peace, joy, connection, love. Okay? These are things that are not, we don't tend to get them the way the ego has told us. The ego tells us we need to win love, we need to conquer the world, we need bigger and better things, we need more. And the truth is, we don't need much. And we already have the love that we seek inside of us. And we live in a miracle, miracle after miracle after miracle. And that isn't something I can logically turn you on to. And again, if you want to argue that the world is terrible because of this or that or inequality or whatever it might be, there's no logical explanation I can give you. This is something that needs to be experienced, again, when your spiritual vision awakens, when the third eye opens. You can see the beauty of each moment. It's just so profoundly beautiful, it's beyond words. But this isn't something that is logically pointed to. This is something that, again, needs to be experienced for oneself. If you've not experienced that, then one way to begin to move in that direction, again, is to begin to listen to the still, small voice, tuning out the fear, running away, trying to defend, trying to, greed is just another form of fear. I hope you understand that when I'm greedy, it's because I'm afraid I'm going to run out of something. So I'm hoarding, right? If I believe in abundance and that I have faith that I'll be taken care of, well, then I don't need to hoard so much, do I? So again, this is just something that we may overlook. We might be saving for retirement and saving for this and that and trying to think of every contingency. And again, from a logical perspective, makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. But from a spiritual perspective, this is tuning us into the wrong voice. So again, from A Course in Miracles, a very simple thing to consider is it love or fear? Is the voice I'm listening to the voice for love, connection, oneness, feeling free? Or is it the voice of separation, of fear, of defense? That's really all we need to consider. Now, if you're having trouble tuning in, what I recommend is getting still and getting quiet. Now, I teach a type of meditation that will help you do that. It's a very formalized practice, but it's not the only way. Any way that you can truly get still and quiet, turn off the music, turn off the noise, get comfortable. Maybe you lay down, maybe you sit up, you get still and quiet. You just allow yourself to be in that unknown of the stillness and the quiet. And then if you like, you can ask questions, but you're not trying to solve it mentally. It's a very important distinction to make. You're trying to think through the problem. You're still using your logical mind, which is a portion, you could say, of the ego. So we're looking for answers that come from a deeper place. And again, oftentimes, they're not answers that make sense, and they're not answers that we necessarily want to hear. But they are answers that recognize the unity of all things and the wholeness of all things. And they will tend to move us in a way that optimizes for the betterment of all, not necessarily our individual personal perspective. From our personal perspective, at least temporarily, it might feel like we're being moved in the wrong direction and that we're being asked to suffer or to sacrifice for something greater. But in A Course in Miracles, they say very clearly that this isn't the case. It feels like it and seems like it from the egoic perspective, which we're used to, but in ultimate truth, this isn't really possible. All right, so I hope that was helpful for you. If you have any questions about anything, I do hope you'll reach out, and I'd love to hear your experience. People are very reluctant to comment for whatever reason, but I would love to hear from you, your experience with this. Also, it's been kind of a rough ride with inflation. As yoga teacher, I don't make a lot of money, and as I've mentioned, it's been tough to sort of keep things going. So if you'd like to make a contribution, if you've been on the fence thinking about it, I'm going to really encourage you to go ahead and maybe check out Patreon and consider making some kind of financial contribution to help me keep things going. Until next time, everyone, namaste and have a beautiful day.